Thank you very much for coming. This session is talking about the accelerating innovation. Innovation is a kind of ordinary world these days, but I believe innovation is not so ordinary things, because if everybody sees something great, then it cannot be called innovation, right? So in that sense, innovation is only coming from outskirt, external, or maybe crazy. If at least one thing not everybody believes. So today we have a great guest, a great panelist from US and Japan, JDM. Everybody knows. He's now doing. Oh, of course, everybody knows. He set up everything, from the start, right? Yeah. Oh, I forgot the name of the service, right? Yahoo. But anyway, so now he's running a great capital things, AME Cloud, right? Do you know this AME is coming from Japanese word? Ame. Ame means rain, from the cloud, but the different meaning as well, right? Why you named this AME?
Yeah, it's great to be back in Japan, and I think many of you know I have a very long personal history in Japan. I was here as a student when I was at Stanford University, and I met my wife first in Kyoto, and in the early '90s, and that was the first place I went when I came from the U.S. to Japan was Kyoto. So I thought maybe all of Japan looked like Kyoto. It was very romantic.
Different.
Yeah.
Slightly different.
So when I left Yahoo and I wanted to start my own investment firm, I wanted to focus on the cloud. And so, of course, I feel like all the discussion about cloud is not very useful if you don't have rain. As we all know, rain is what makes life sustainable on the earth. So, so ame is rain in Japanese. It's also candy, right?
Oh. But candy.
Yeah, it's meant to be rain.
Candy for whom?
And it's also the initials of my wife, Akiko, my daughters, Miki and Emi. So
this is very important,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Especially for innovators, family management is very important, right? Thank you, Jerry. And the Morikawa-san here. He has a unique bio, and also what he's doing right now is pretty unique, both in Japan and the world. How you get the everything so nicely means you did different business, right? And from your organization you brought up totally new service internally. How you manage it?
すみません、日本語で。
Well, please allow me to speak in Japanese. No, I think that it's a matter of breaking down fixed notions. There may be good times or bad times. When things go well, everything that's going well is considered to be correct, but then you'll end up in failure eventually. The important thing is to cast away the past and always face the future and solidly create something for the future.
Philosophical words coming out. So we're gonna discuss this later in detail. And Matt, coming from Silicon Valley, he is an angel investor as well as advisor to entrepreneurs mainly, right? And his main domain for the investment would be healthcare and the IT applications, consumer applications. And how do you feel the difference between Japan and the Silicon Valley?
Well, that's a big question. I actually think there's more similarities than differences. I think that in Silicon Valley, there's a passion for beautiful things, just like in Japan. The product is an art form. And one of the things that I admire about Japan so much, this is my 4th visit, is that everything is an art form, from the food that you eat, to the room, to the garden, to the service where you get in and out of a taxi cab. And I think most entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley try and replicate that. So I think the differences are actually much smaller than we think, and that there are many similarities that entrepreneurs in both countries can build upon.
That's a very impressive opinion. Anyway, so JD, what I found is, JD has a great impression of Kyoto, and Matt has a big impression of Roppongi. And these two guys are different image of Japan, but they both are Japan. So let's go into the discussion about the innovation. So first round, we're going to welcome each panelist speech on the innovation, starting from Morikawa-san, then Jerry, and Matt. Please, Morikawa-san.
My name is Morikawa, CEO of Line Corporation, and let me explain my bio. In 1989, I entered Nippon Television after graduating a computing and engineering faculty of a university, and then I entered Sony. And right now, I entered the company that I'm working for now when we were still showing a loss. We had only 30 persons at that time, and I became the president 4 years ago and have grown this company. And we had portal business, search business, and then about 3 years ago we started the Line business. And starting from last year, we changed the company name to Line, and we're now making a global challenge. In regard to the Line service, it was immediately after the Great East Japan earthquake. We started the services in June 23rd. At first, it was just the messenger service, and then there was stamp, and then we had the free call service, and then we started an innovation in a new type of visual communication. And then after that, we have moved forward with a platform approach for games or for e-books and for contents, as well as we have this model for advertising, and we have also started e-commerce activities and telephone business activities. A variety of different activities are being carried out, and we have now grown to an extent where we have over 400 million users. As for today's theme, we're talking about innovation and entrepreneurs and managers and investors and what kind of challenges they face. Now, there were new businesses that I started off in a large corporation, and now I'm operating a venture operation. In regard to the issues that I faced within a corporation, I think that there are issues that exist, and when you try to embark on a new innovation, it's necessary to destroy what has existed in the past. For the management, or for the corporate culture, or for the people who are working there, it's necessary for them to break down the old way of thinking or the old structures. That's the most important point. There are several elements that I'd like to talk about. Now, in regard to large corporations and startup companies, which are easier to start up innovation? You had to be a corporate giant in the past because no one had money unless you were a corporate giant, and so it was considered difficult unless you were belonging to a large corporation. But from my experience, it doesn't matter whether it's a large company or a small company. Rather, if there's members that can create change, and when there's the environment for things to take place, then it's important what can be done. The more successful the company, there's the main business, and then when something new needs to be carried out, there's going to be those who oppose as well as those forces who try to destroy what exists right now. Now, there are going to be internally people who will try to obstruct you when you try to do something new. So in order to persuade such people, it takes a lot of time. That's why smaller organizations are quicker to implement new things. In my case, regardless of whether it's a large organization or a small organization, it's necessary to provide value at a very fast speed. I think that's the most important point.
人とお金どっちが
Now then comes the next question, which is more important, people or cash? Now, when you try to start something new, you often hear the phrase, I don't have enough money. And yes, it's true, money is important. But when we consider innovation, money does not drive innovation. Innovation is driven by people. So in order to innovate, you may need technology, you may need ideas, you may need speed. But regardless, it's all about people. Now, about these people, usually they're somewhat on the peculiar side. Maybe not crazy in a true sense, but they are a little bit different. Which means that in terms of conventional corporate culture, they just do not fit. So how do you incorporate this difference? How can you embrace this diversity? And yes, eventually you will need money to promote that innovation. Now, moving on, the next question, is it service or is it profit? Now, especially, I do want the investors in the audience to think about this. So yes, you are managing a company, so we do have to generate profit. That's a given. But even more importantly, you do need to offer value to the user, to the customer. Now, this value, it comes in many shapes and forms. If you want to promote a big value, then it does take that much time. So first, you do need to enhance the customer value, and then from there on, reap profits. I really do want the investors to understand this point. And what is the scale of value that you can give to your customers or your users is something that the people that innovate need to be considerate of. Now, the next question is it technology or speed? Now, to have competitive edge, there are, again, many facets that you can promote. And technical or technology differentiation is extremely important, I agree. But having said that, you cannot mistake this. Is this technology actually creating benefit for the end user? Again, you do have to question yourself, and especially those who have an engineer background and they are leading a company. They love their technology. And they know that that technology is not generating value, but they just cannot let go of the technology that they love. So yes, they challenge themselves with different types of technologies, but it turns out that they've exhausted their investments and a later player comes along and they benefit from that idea. So yes, technology is important, but again, how do you leverage that technology and how do you heighten the speed or accelerate the speed of converting that technology and manifesting that technology into value is even more important. And now we originally were funded by a Korean company, but we are a company now originating in Japan. Nintendo, the Walkman. There have been many innovations that have occurred in this country, but for the internet, there is just not enough innovation happening in this country. So we now have more than 400 million users using Line, and so I would like to shed some light on the type of decision-making, how we considered our services, and how we structured ourselves to make this happen. So I'll start off with our decision-making process. We do not, or we intentionally do not plan too far out for the future. Now, yes, it's true that you could succeed by following a very wide road and committing to a goal, but now the roads are winding and you do not know what that next corner may bring about. But here in Japan, once you do have a business plan, people feel afraid to steer away from that business plan. But still, times are changing, society is changing, and you cannot play catch up. So yes, if we do not have a business plan, then we do not have to worry whether we are adhering to that business plan or not. So we can focus ourselves on what is the current trend. We only look ahead for the next 3 months, and we are very agile, we are very speedy in making sure that we embrace this upcoming trend. Now for our corporate structure or our organization, we do not take a top-down approach and where we would instruct orders from management and create manuals and follow specific processes. So we often call this the football or soccer method. Now, I think Japanese companies are very good with the baseball approach. So you have who's up first, who's in the batter box, and so forth. But with soccer, it's a very different game. The general manager gives free rein to their team members. But it's not that everybody is doing whatever they want to. It is all about delegation. To what extent can you empower the people that are leading the team, and how can you nurture them in a way that they can make the right decision quickly? Now, in a manufacturing company, it's not the people that are creating something that are great. Everybody involved. That means the designers, the R&D people, everyone. And without a big fat manual, everything does need to be done real time, decided real time, and everyone does need to collaborate, and that is what we are embracing in our company. Now, thirdly is how we approach services. For us at Line, we actually do not have that many meetings. So if there is a new idea, we do want to expound on that idea. So yes, we may have meetings, but if we have meetings with many people attending, or if there are executives involved in these meetings, then everybody seems to become timid. And as a result of these meetings, something mediocre emerges. So, on the contrary, we feel that the ideas need to be sharp. And whether it's a good idea or not, it's not the president, it's not the company members that decide. It's the consumer, it's the user through their tweets, through the actual numbers. So it's the consumers, the customers that decide whether this service is good or bad. So ultimately, we do need to assume that this is something potentially that the consumer wants, and we need to manifest that, and that is the way we approach our services. Now, we were funded by a Korean company initially, and so 30% of the investors are non-Japanese, and also the employees as well. And so I think that not many Japanese companies follow suit. So that is all the more why we are diverse, and that is why we are willing to challenge ourselves outside of Japan as well. Now, especially the internet services have been centered and oriented around Silicon Valley. But for us at Line, we want to generate innovation from Asia. And we are pursuing this challenge as we speak. And we have now reached the 400 million point. We want to reach 500 or 600 million users by the end of the year, and then further expand our base. So we are not just about offering services. Through these services, we want to change and revolutionize society. Now, this change in society, it does not necessarily mean that you have to have a huge idea. We actually feel that it's an incremental process, following a very, very narrow path. And you may not be conscious of this on a day-to-day basis, but taking these steps one after another along the line, you'll see something new. Something new will emerge. It's not something perhaps flamboyant, but it is something that is very, very useful to society. It is a part of the infrastructure of the society. So on that note, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morikawa-san. But this is a very unique story because you don't have any plan, you don't have any meeting, and just thinking about customer. sounds great, but in the growing process, it's going to work. But if you have something to solve, or some barriers suddenly comes out, how you can cope with that?
How should I say this? The basic thing is that there has to be something good, but you also have to be able to destroy the past, and you need to have compatibility between the two. Of course, that's difficult. There may be something good. And how should I say it? How do you determine that something is good? That's an important thing for management to decide.
Balancing balancing the organizational power, or maybe distributing decision rights to all the people. It's going to be a very unique, and we haven't learned anything like that from business school, right, Jerry?
I didn't go to business school, so.
How do you feel?
Well, I think that Morikawa-san is describing a very modern way of running high agility, innovative-driven, fast growth. That graph he has looks like the map of Japan, right? Upward and to the right. So I don't think it's that unusual, but like you said, maybe when you have much bigger staff, then you have to have some organization. But I love the soccer analogy. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Any thoughts, Matt?
Yes, I would agree with Jerry as well, that the soccer analogy is a good one. And, we often in Silicon Valley refer to like a jazz band, right? Where, for a time, maybe the drummer will play, and then maybe the saxophone will play, and then they all come together and play one tune, and it's that music that is ultimately the product, which is quite beautiful as well.
I'm just waiting for translators finishing everything. Okay, thank you very much, Morikawa-san. Then, Jerry, your thoughts on innovation.
Thank you. I will keep my comments short to allow more time for group discussion. But as Natsuno-san mentioned, I am now working in my own kind of individual investment firm called Ame Cloud Ventures. And we primarily, it's myself and I have two other associates that work with me, but we also co-invest with a number of other funds, angel funds and venture funds. I have two overriding themes. One is we are investing in entrepreneurs. Of course, that's a very wide definition. So in order to narrow that down, we also invest in the space of data-driven businesses. Part of that is when I started Ame in early 2012, there was a big wave of people starting it's called the big data companies. A lot of them actually had Yahoo connections. At Yahoo, we were one of the first companies in order to deal with the volume of log data and things like that to create big data infrastructure. And then probably one of the more famous one is Hadoop, which is an open source data management, data manipulation database service. So there were a lot of companies being started by Yahoo alumni at that time around Hadoop and around creating big data ecosystem in Silicon Valley. So, so that became part of our theme. So entrepreneurs and data-driven businesses. Over the last, I guess, almost 2 years, more than 2 years, our portfolio, we have invested over 50 companies. So we are seeing quite a range of different activity, and most of them are in Silicon Valley, but obviously we also have investments in other places. And the philosophy is not, I mean, I think the goal is, of course, to make companies successful, and therefore, kind of the way to keep score is by how much money you make. But we are, not a traditional fund. We are really betting on entrepreneurs and really focused on kind of the long-term impact and long-term vision. And we also want to have learn about new areas. So you will not find in my portfolio too many things that look like the Yahoo internet businesses, and I will describe some. But as I've experienced and learned from all these entrepreneurs over the last 2 years, what has been fascinating to me is that it really feels like now, this decade, or certainly from the last decade, maybe after '09 to now, it feels like it's kind of the golden age for innovation and entrepreneurship. This is potentially even more exciting than when we started Yahoo in the mid-'90s, or in the mid-2000s when you had Web 2.0. And I think there are a number of trends that everybody's already referred to, but because I'm in the business now of looking at entrepreneurs, both very early entrepreneurs, about half of our deals are early stage startups, but also we invest in later stage entrepreneurs, so companies that already have some scale. But seeing that breadth, you really realize that it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. It is incredible how fast you can build businesses. It is incredible how much you can do with fewer people. And like Morikawa said, it is very much about a user-driven, data-driven. You have to operate at an incredible agility and speed, but I think you have so much tools to help you, tell you how do you get there. So, so this is a golden age of entrepreneurs. It's a golden age, I think, of starting to create, billion-dollar ideas. And this is happening around consumer and around enterprise. Line is a great example of a consumer company. WhatsApp, our portfolio has a company called Tango. But if you just look at the messaging space alone, it is creating a new revolution. It is the next generation portal. It's the next generation communication service. And I think that it is all it is all made possible through mobility and cloud. But even in the consumer space, we are seeing tremendous innovation because of mobile. Things, what people call O2O, online to offline, or sort of logistics-based businesses, marketplace businesses, Uber or Airbnb or Lyft. These are businesses that are new categories that are invented because mobility is now mature enough. And I agree with Hirai-san earlier. I mean, Japan was the leader, the pioneer, really, in taking mobility and advanced services to mobile devices. And I think it's only in the last 5 years, I think the U.S. Has really created critical mass in terms of innovation. So we can maybe talk more about consumer, but I think there's just so much going on in consumers around commerce, about communications, around logistics, around, of course, there's content, and what we're seeing is new categories being created, not just copies of old businesses. In the enterprise, I would say that it's even more exciting. My portfolio in our companies, we probably have more enterprise companies, and it's all driven by the software as a service model, the cloudification of enterprise software. So if you think about what enterprises have to do and how they used to do it, enterprise software used to be that you don't, you have to use it, but you really don't want to use it. And what has happened over the last 5 years is there's a complete rethink of how enterprise software is approached. In fact, a lot of the elements of our consumer experience, engagement, features that people want to use, data-driven analysis so that we really track how people are using it and therefore improve upon it. These are very basic things that we learn from consumer internet. Now those are being applied to enterprise software. So I'm on the board of Workday, which is a cloud-based HR and financial systems. But you can now it seems rather obvious now to say that, hey, you can release software on the fly. You don't have to wait for one-year versions. You don't have to wait for consultants to deploy your enterprise software. You can have it on-premise or on cloud. You can have it hybrid. You can have mobile solutions with apps that people actually want to use. And this is now pervasive. This is not just one company, but I think you're seeing entire generations of enterprise-based companies. Large guys like Google and even Microsoft is trying to reinvent their enterprise software through the cloud. But you see emerging categories like Box and Dropbox, and we're seeing just tons of startups around this. What's happening at the technology level? I'm fundamentally more of a technologist, and I think if you think about technology as sort of infrastructure, platforms, systems, applications, every layer is being reinvented because of big data. So at the infrastructure level, we're seeing what's called convergent infrastructure. Traditional definitions around networking, compute, and storage, that is being merged or converged, or basically the old definitions are being thrown out the window. We have a company that is doing a converged switching and compute server and switch infrastructure that is helping manage virtual networks in the cloud. We have a company called Pure Storage, which is reinventing storage, completely rewriting the storage stack, the disk operating system, and the file format, and building disks using conventional flash SSD. But as you move up the stack, you're seeing system software being redeployed around bigger and bigger data and higher volume data. Databases, I think, are being fundamentally changed because the amount of data that needs to be stored. Data warehouses are being rewritten on the cloud as a service. And it's really remarkable when you go through and think about enterprises that want to operate and build their own applications. They can do this now with very fast and very open software. We have a company that is helping one of the very large industrial companies in the US to put sensors in the farming fields. And these sensors will report conditions, soil conditions, growth conditions, weather conditions back into a cloud that is run by essentially Hadoop plus some supported software. And these are applications that in the old days takes years and a lot of consulting time to build. So companies are seeing not just replacing old ERM or CRM or ERP, but really creating new applications. Lastly, what is exciting about this golden era is not just that we're changing consumer and enterprise and that we're changing the technology stack. It really is that it is becoming mainstream in certainly society, in the way we live and the way we work and the way we govern and the way we talk to each other. Matt will talk a little more about healthcare, but I think if you think about big data and healthcare, this is one of the primary areas where the entire healthcare chain, especially in the US, can be disrupted. We are looking at big data applications around currency. There's a lot of discussion around Bitcoin, but I think ultimately virtual currency and even non-virtual currency will be affected by big data. We just invested in an artificial intelligence company called Vicarious, which is a completely different way of creating the human brain using computer and mathematical formulas. And it's a very ambitious, bold, and who knows if it works kind of thing, but it's so compelling that I think if you think about, I remember being in Japan in 1992, and the big buzz back then here in Japan was artificial intelligence. Maybe many of you don't remember, you're too young, but it was it was either the 5th or 6th generation computing become artificial intelligence. But my point here is that we can be revisiting what assumptions we used to have, kind of to Morikawa-san's point. The old assumption we all had is no longer the assumption we should live with anymore, because of the convergence of the networking, the cloud, the mobility. we can rethink and reconstruct so many new things. We just invested in a company in robotics. Japan is a leader in robotics, but I think that if you think about robotics brought down to commodity hardware, to a few $1,000s, less than $1,000, what will that do to our society? So I would end by saying that I think these fundamental changes in our world, even though I'm seeing this at a very early stage, I'm very excited, and I think we will see some very big impacts in the changes in the lives of people because these technologies are becoming mainstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. This is very implicational, especially for the investors, angels, and venture capitals, I think. Because, when I look at the many venture capitalists, especially in Japan, many people are just looking for innovation. Just try to look at the good companies. But Jerry, your approach is more scientific. Means you have a kind of assumption and the prediction, and based on that, you are trying to find out innovation in your view or in your philosophy. And is this originally coming from your experience as an entrepreneur?
I think some of it is. I probably make it sound better than it really is. It's. I think that at the end of the day, we of course create some ideas and hypotheses and assumptions and try to go against them. But more often than not, you meet the entrepreneur, and in 10 minutes you go, "Oh my gosh, I have no idea if this guy's assumption is right or fits my thesis, but whatever he's talking about, he's really good." So you fall in love, and you fall in love with the entrepreneur. So I think it's good to have some system, which I have, but I think ultimately it becomes whether that system can be tested by entrepreneurs or it could be supported by entrepreneurs. So I think, like I said, the principle of supporting the entrepreneurial spirit was number one, and then having the space is kind of secondary.
And pretty similar to your approach, Matt?
Exactly, and I was actually going to recommend that you can't force innovation. The only thing you can do as an entrepreneur is create the culture and the environment where innovation can develop, and you nurture that. And I think it's innovation comes from the most unexpected places, and I think entrepreneurs also come from the most unexpected places. In my career, I started initially in public service. I worked at the White House and the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and I just wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so typically, I think some of the most, and I think Ben yesterday is another great example. He wasn't a sort of stereotypical entrepreneur, same with Jerry and David before they started Yahoo. And so the analogy I keep in my head often is the Disney movie Ratatouille, which is very simplistic, but the idea is that a rat that lives beneath Paris becomes a world-famous chef. And I think that's a strong analogy for entrepreneurs, that they come from the most unexpected places, and innovation also comes from the most unexpected places. And so you have to be accepting of that and open to that. And I think the biggest failure within at least Silicon Valley companies for the founders or the entrepreneurs, the executives, is that they don't spend enough time on culture. And what starts to develop as a company gets bigger, it's easy when you're just two people working in a garage. Where it gets to be challenging is where you're 200 people or 2,000 people. And politics starts to creep into the organization. Silos start to developing, so you have marketing here, you have business development here, you have product here, engineering here, finance, and they become little sort of fiefdoms inside the company. And so your role as an entrepreneur or as an innovator is to break down those silos and to cross-pollinate between different groups. And so that's my lesson as an entrepreneur, and what I try to do now as an angel investor and an advisor for young startups is thinking through those issues. The most important thing as an angel investor or an advisor is not writing a check or making introductions. It's really working through those difficult challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis.
And Morikawa-san, you must have a lot of challenges always. But how you can host innovative mindset in your employees, among your employees?
これはまあ
Well, how should I say it? First of all, it is directly linked to how you live. Essentially, are you a person that wants to create something or to benefit from something? For people who want to benefit from something, it's difficult for them to generate something new. But regardless of whether they're capable of doing that or not, it's important to get people who desire to create something new. And then empowerment to those people will allow something to be created. And so you have to create what is necessary for them to do that.
Your turn, Matt? Your turn.
Oh, my turn. Well, I said a lot of the key things that I wanted to talk about, but I think we talked a lot yesterday about failure. And everyone said, yes, you have to accept failure. But it was mostly internal. It was you accept it. And I think a big thing in Silicon Valley that also helps make those companies successful is that they celebrate failure. It's not just me accepting that I failed. It's me talking about it with my colleagues or the people that report to me. It's not being embarrassed by it. And I think that's probably, goes hand in hand with the culture issue. But the celebrating of failure is not something that comes naturally, I don't think, to any person. You want to be successful at school. You want to be successful in sports or with your family. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to fail a fair amount. And actually, the best entrepreneurs are the ones that sometimes failed the most miserably. Some of the biggest failures have gone on to be the biggest success. And I think I would harness that. It's important that when you do fail, that when you do stumble as an entrepreneur or as an innovator or a leader, is that you dust yourself off and share that experience with your team and let them know that it's okay to take that risk and that failure is really not the problem. The problem is not trying. And I would encourage all of you who are thinking about being an entrepreneur is really the only thing that's standing in the way of that is your own decision. And so really, kind of take the idea by its shoulders and run with it. I think someone yesterday was saying, none of us are probably going to starve. None of us, if we don't have a job today, we'll find one tomorrow. And so I think, accept that risk, treasure it, and then welcome the failure.
That's a very important thing, but very hard to do because, once you fail, then, without having a kind of, sympathize people, the people who help you from the sympathy rather than the financial reason or probability of next success would be necessary, right?
Right. Yeah. There are some social components of it, and I don't pretend to think that this will happen overnight. But surround yourself with people that encourage you. Like Mikitani-san. Within his team. Nurturing that and having a mentor for that. And it starts small, but then it grows. So the people that are Mikitani-san's mentees will then go on to do that in return with the next generation. And then slowly it starts to spread.
Maybe we can go into the discussion from that point. If that is, from that point of view, maybe the big companies, entrepreneurship can be better position rather than start up something new in the market, having unknown investors coming up. entrepreneurship, the innovation inside the big company can be better because they have finance, they have supporters, and the risk would be less, right?
Right. I mean, Jerry could maybe talk about this from Yahoo. I do know at Google, where they encourage employees to take 25% of their time and do something completely different from their day job. So it could be, how do we put another person on the moon much cheaper and faster? How do we get rid of cars? How do we cure diabetes? Big ideas. Now they can afford to do it because they have a lot of money. But maybe there's a day where within these big companies in Japan, different teams, a member from each team comes together and they brainstorm an idea for 5 hours.
But not so many companies can be like Google or Apple.
Right, and now those were over many years, right? It didn't start right at day one. So if you start, maybe this is half a day, 1 day a year, where you have this kind of innovation that might start to happen. It's planting the seeds and hope that it grows.
Jerry, you manage the big company. Right? Yeah. Why the big companies cannot take advantage of this advantage?
I think you have to, especially now, I talk to a lot of CEOs in the U.S. and we talk about this question a lot about, is it easier from innovating from the outside or is it easier to innovate from the inside? And the example that keeps coming to mind is General Electric, GE, and Jeffrey Immelt has really created an entrepreneurial spirit. It doesn't get much bigger or older style company than GE in the U.S., but they have really taken on the Internet of Things and this idea of the cloud changing, fundamentally disrupting every aspect of their business. And they've done this through both putting serious money into companies that will help them grow within their ecosystem, but also they've set up something in the East Bay of California, in San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay, a true innovation center. And I think that's something that is an example where a big company in the U.S. can focus on innovation in a very long-term way. I think, if I think about what the common theme about an entrepreneur, two people in the garage versus a big company, what is the innovation? Why do you need to innovate? The answer always seems to be a sense of urgency. If you don't have a sense of urgency, you're just not going to innovate. You can always do something else. And I think, of course, for a startup, there's always a sense of urgency. You're going to run out of money. You don't have enough people. You don't have enough time. You got competitors. So it's an environment that has much more urgency. And I think in a big company, the inevitable argument is, we can wait another quarter or we can wait another month. And I think in order to be very successful in big companies, there has to be some sense of urgency, either created by the external market or internally the culture has to foster kind of sense of urgency. And I don't know Japan as well today, but I still feel very hopeful, if you will. We see many companies that come from Japan to the Silicon Valley, and to me, when they come and talk to us and show us what they're thinking about, whether it's the telcos or the automotive industry, I do think there's serious thought of innovation. We didn't talk about the car, but I think the automobile is one of the greatest platform for innovation in our generation. We have a lot of startups doing things to cars and things like that. But if you think about the assets here in Japan, it is really an incredible opportunity, I think, to innovate around the automobile. And I've seen some. I've seen, Docomo, Euro company. We've seen Pioneer. We've seen venture funds that are really starting to put money in. And I think this idea of companies with huge scale and really nimble technology and be able to collaborate in a very light touch way. I mean, if you have to work with hundreds of people and hundreds of points of integration, it just won't work. So I do think I'm very positive about future potential for innovation here.
And Morikawa-san, your company knows a lot of different services from inside, right? So what would be the pros and cons of doing innovation internally from your view?
そうですね。
If I may speak of another company or another person first, if you have there are smart people and then there are crazy people. So we'll state that as a fact. Now, we don't have that many crazy people. If you want to drive something, you need these crazy people, and they collectively generate something new. But on the contrary, it's very difficult to manage these so-called crazy people because there is always conflict amongst themselves, and at times it just does not work. But again, can you have a platform? Can you have a company that accepts that? Now, we have more smart people than crazy people. Now, so for the smart people, how can they face innovation? If you're satisfied with the status quo, then you do not need smart people. So the smart people need to understand that there's benefit in innovation, and can you create that platform for them?
Environment in your company.
そう、それはなんだろう。
Yes, but it's not just one structure, and you cannot do this with one structure. You do have to mix and match. It's case by case evaluation and how you manage the environment and so forth. So I think that is the means and ways to generate new ideas and innovation.
HN culture or line culture?
まあ LINE から出たところは大きいです。
A lot of it has come from line. Because we have so many non-Japanese staff, we have many people with many career backgrounds, and we have a couple of companies that merged as well. So we were dispersed to begin with. So we needed to convert this very fragmented company into something of value.
Time is running up, so here we open up the questions to the audience, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for awesome discussion and presentations. My name is Doga, and I live in the UK and in Africa, so I always tend to see Japan from an outside point of view, which might make you understand my question better. So my question is about Japan's future, and often one of the greatest reasons why Japan is going quite downward in terms of its economy is because Japan is very inward. And every media, critiques, governments are now talking about the great importance of a world diversity, and which is going to include migration and entrepreneurial spirit and everything. I'd like to ask about, so Jerry, you experienced some cultures of Kyoto, right? And Matt, DC and East Coast of the States, as well as the Silicon Valley, and both Morikawa-san and Natsuno-san in Japan as a whole. So Kyoto does indeed have some world-leading companies like Kyocera, Murata Manufacturing, Nintendo, and I was talking to one of the professors recently who moved from MIT to Kyoto University to teach, and he told me an interesting thing that I feel Kansai region, Kyoto, is more entrepreneurial than Kanto. It's like me living in the Silicon Valley. And it is true, arguably, no offense to any Kansai people, or we call it Kansaijin, they are very welcoming, more friendly, short-tempered, love jokes, and they say they don't like queuing.
And different language, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean as well. So my question is, do you really see this regional variation in Japan? And if so, do you think it's actually important to have such regional variations within a country in order to thrive and have this diversity mind? Yeah, it'd be great to ask, hear your opinions on the places where innovation occurs at. Thanks.
I might just at least take one quick second. Jerry's spent a lot more time in Japan than I have, and obviously Morikawa-san knows it better than I do. I think one important thing to note in Silicon Valley is that most of the people are transplants. They didn't grow up there. There's very few entrepreneurs that grew up in Silicon Valley. Yeah, I probably can count less than 10 that have been successful and stuck with it. So I think that diversity is critical for success of Japan overall. I would definitely nurture that diversity and not try and streamline it into one form because more ideas will come from that, better perspectives will come from that, and ultimately more innovation will come from it.
You have any thoughts on Kyoto?
I totally agree with Matt. I think that if you look at Japan and the issues for the society for the next 50 years, I mean, everybody talks about the Japan population might be half what it is if you don't change, and I think you have a bigger problem than just entrepreneurship. But I think that is also very, very fixable, but culturally, I think it's very different. Because I think just the nature of your question that, Kansai versus Kanto, that's not really diversity anymore in the global sense. It's much, it's much more than that. And but I do think that regional differences, if you look at what's happening in LA, San Francisco, New York, they are developing their own sort of community, critical mass community, and therefore expertise. Same thing in China. You look at Beijing, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, Shanghai. They're developing different aspects of skills because of the people. And I'm a strong believer that, I think that you first have to have diversity, but then because of the region, because of the strength, you will have some specialization that I think builds on and adds to that diversity.
Let me take one more question and close this session. One more question over there. Far in the back, center, red. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the insightful discussion. My name is Yoshiyasu Kitahara from Kansai University. So you're from Kansai. Brilliant context. So there was mention of taking risks, and you can fail. It's important too. But before you fail, I want to ask a question about before you fail, or even before you do something. I mean, if you think that you can fail beforehand, then it sort of gives you sort of a room to, give excuses. So in other words, what should your mindset be before you fail?
That's a great question. So you never set out with the expectation of failing. You set out with the expectation of succeeding. There are two different things. It's not about excuses. It's really about freedom of worry. You're not worried about the outcome. And when you're not worried about the outcome, anything can happen. If you're worried about the outcome, you're not going to be going full power. Think of it as a brick wall, and you're going to get through that brick wall. Now, you might fail and you might bounce right off the wall, but I'm going to run as fast as possible at that wall, knowing all the information that I know, which I know is not a perfect amount of information. It will be limited, and I won't have all the variables, but I'll still have a rough idea how thick the wall is, what's it made of, what's the cement, and I make that calculation, but that doesn't stop you from doing it. So it's not about excuses. I'm glad you said that. Any entrepreneur sets out to succeed, and that's also not to say if you see a problem coming up, a hurdle coming up, you try to adjust, try to tack, try and fix it and then get around it. But some things you can't get around, and that's happened to all three of us for sure, where you try and adjust and you just can't adjust enough, or there's things outside of your control. But that's not to make an excuse. You tried your best, and then you learn from it. You apply those lessons, and you teach the people that are your colleagues, work for you, work above you, your investors. So I think you build upon it, and then you don't make the same mistake again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the excellent speakers. I think audiences are getting a lot of implications from our speech. So thank you very much, and please appreciate all the speakers, please. And I'm sorry for the bad time management. Thank you very much.